The FEZ soundtrack by Disasterpeace is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks in gaming. Let's dive in, take a listen, and talk about it. This is the opening track from the game called Adventure. I love how it fades in, it really feels like the beginning. The repeated figure and the hop-skip percussion and the modified sounds makes it feel like a wondrous, carefree trot. The first steps of an adventure through an alien psychedelic landscape. Disasterpeace said this is the first track he wrote for the game. He experimented early running through tape. Initially wanted everything through tape, but it proved too impractical as tape would lose its tempo gradually. He wrote this a few days after meeting the game's programmer. It represented his feelings about how he wanted the music to sound in the game. Disasterpeace said about the music for this game that there's a lot of reverb everywhere, which helps to make things a bit pattier and more reminiscent of 80s synth scores than chiptunes, which he was known for previously. There's also a lot of tape warp effects, bit crushing, and other kinds of distortions to mold things into a cohesive, consistent sound. Abstaining from using percussion in most parts, he thinks it went a long way in capturing the right vibe. He also tended to slow things down a lot, and a bunch of the tracks have very fluid tempos that ebb, flow, and breathe along with the player. There's also sections of the game without music, which he thought would create the same sort of effect. This is Puzzle. Another repeated figure, sounds a little darker than before, and then that figure disappears. An ominous tone fades in and out. New pieces are added and the key modulates to signify the new layers and discoveries of the puzzle. Disasterpeace said he made this one by messing around with a new instrument called Synplant by Sonic Charge. It had an unusual but ingenious interface. In-game, the song is broken up into 27 individual assets. It plays phrases and moves through keys depending on different times of day in the game. This is Beyond. It's smothering lows, piercing highs, radio fuzz. It sounds like the radio dial broke off and you've gone past the point any human ears have reached before. There's a hopeful glimmer of notes that eventually appear, beckoning you towards the light as you push on through this deeply bewildering game. Disasterpeace had this to say about Beacon. I tried with the song to create the notion of a massive pulsating structure that controls and manipulates rather indifferently. Despite that, there is an upswing in the mood because contextually, Gomez, the character in the game, has really happened upon something special. The beginning sound, which is the sound of Gomez entering a special portal for the first time, is an attempt to capture a sound similar to that of the THX logo. That sound always gave me goosebumps. I feel lucky that creating that sort of effect these days does not require thousands of lines of code. After the nightmare of the Beyond track, the Beacon calls out to the player. Its casual pace is relaxing, the sounds are still hazy and the chord progression sometimes unpredictable, but there are enough notes that suggest this could be safe and the right path. Disasterpeace said the Native Instruments' massive synth became his go-to and featured heavily on this track. This track, Compass, was heavily influenced by Distant Worlds by Sam Hulick, the map music from Mass Effect. Disasterpeace always liked that track, and for some reason he kept envisioning Shepard standing at the map screen in his ship while he was writing Compass. It has a stability to it, he says, like Love on a Real Train by Tangerine Dream that he wanted. I also wanted it to feel really warm and sunny and somewhat important. This track is called Forgotten. It's icy, cold, alone, and beautiful. The artist wrote on his blog that during the game, the music from this track takes on a different form, depending on where you are and what time of day it is. This version he included on the album is edited down to incorporate portions of each. The shaky distortion present here is a result of modulating the amplitude of various parts with a noise signal. The artist wrote of failed ideas during the process. During the idea process, we definitely had some more ambitious ideas that turned out not to make much sense. One of the ideas was to have the music change depending on what side of a level you're facing. Of course, the player rotates so frequently that this ended up not being a very practical thing to do musically. Though on second thought, perhaps it could have worked in certain more jittery places. The next track is called Legend. Quote, "This track started as me messing with chords continuously moving up major thirds, which is a sound I like. I tried to do something almost flute-like with the melody. I think I was probably inspired a little by the Shire theme from The Lord of the Rings." End quote. The strange sounds of the game have now become familiar. This track is very reverential, wistful, and powerful. The next track, Disasterpeace originally came up with the melody on his aunt's piano at Christmas. It's called Death. About the FEZ soundtrack, Disasterpeace said, quote, "I think for the most part, the freedom I had made this one of the easiest and most fun things I've ever gotten to do. I also gave myself free rein to do a lot of improvisation, and I repurposed a lot of older ideas that never got used. They seemed to me that they would fit well in FEZ, and that made it somewhat easier to work on. I definitely spent a lot of time tweaking sound design on a couple of tracks though, and I think that's where I spent the most time." For me, the FEZ soundtrack is a beautiful journey, exploring sounds, dealing with hope, loneliness, imagination, and anything else my mind wanders to while listening. I've never actually played the game, but I'll be listening to the score for years to come. The developer wanted to end the game with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Disasterpeace chose Chopin's Prelude Op. 28 No. 4 in E minor instead. He worked from a MIDI file, messed with the pacing and other textural effects, worked his magic, and ended up with this as a closing piece. And that's what we'll end with. Thanks for listening. Please leave any comments on what you thought of the soundtrack, suggestions for future ones we can spotlight, and have a good one.